The Idaho Commission on the Arts, an Idaho state agency under the Office of the Governor, enables access to the arts education, and Idahoans' cultural and artistic heritage. With me today to talk about this is Rachel Morgan, Program Specialist at Nebraska Arts Council, and Annette Roth, Community Development Manager at Washington State Arts Commission. The Nebraska Arts Council is a state agency. They aspire to positively impact the lives of Nebraskans through the power of art. Their mission is to promote, cultivate, and sustain the arts for the people of Nebraska. The Washington Arts Council's mission is to be a catalyst for the arts, advancing the role of the arts in the lives of individuals and communities throughout the state. Their vision is to see the arts thrive and are celebrated throughout Washington state and are woven into the fabric of vital and vibrant communities, and they are also a state agency. So before we dive into today's conversation, I do want to cover some of those Zoom housekeeping tips and things with you all. If you can all make sure that you update your Zoom name to reflect your preferred name, and if applicable, your desired organization and state that you're joining us from. And you can do this by hovering on the bottom controls, selecting participants, and then you just hover over your name and click on rename. Also, captions are available through Zoom platform. You can access the captions feature by going to the bottom controls and click on show captions. To help with your viewing experience today, you can pin Rachel Morgan from Nebraska, Annette Roth from Washington, and I. You can hover over the three dots in the upper right-hand corner of our video squares and select pin. And then that way it ensures that as we're speaking and presenting today that you see us as we're talking to you. And then the last Zoom thing that I want to cover with you is ensuring that you have access to and can find the chat. This is the location where you can find, where you can put comments, questions for the three of us that are presenting today. And you can find that chat by going to the bottom controls and clicking on chat. I'll throw those instructions in the chat for you as well, so you have kind of those different things there. Now, while you're in that chat section, I do want to encourage you to utilize that right now. So I would love to ask all of you participating today, if you could put in the chat, through the lens of the topic today, which is community engagement, what are you hoping to take away from today's presentation? What do you want to learn about? So please type that in the chat, share with Annette and Rachel and I about what you're hoping to learn. And while you're responding, I do want to also mention Michael Wallenfels from Washington is also on here with us. He'll help you out if you have any Zoom technical needs, and he'll assist you one-on-one.
Hello.
Perfect. And then just a reminder that as we move out through today, if you want to just make sure that you keep yourself on mute, that way there's no feedback for the other participants as we're presenting. Today's presentation, it is a tri-state partnership between Idaho, Washington, and Nevada. It's a virtual webinar that's facilitated by the three states. It's available to the public at no cost. We do record the session and we'll make it available through an online resource, and we'll email out a link to that video to everyone that registered for this webinar. In addition to today's topic, we do have a previous webinar the three of us put on for rural creative districts. We hosted that in 2022. And in March of 2024, we're hosting another one about organizational structure for creative districts. So a link to register is going to be shared in that chat now with you for that March upcoming event. And we'll share that again with you later. But thank you so much again for being here. Today, it's kind of a round robin conversation. We have four primary topics the three of us are planning to chat about. We'll cover things such as the community engagement process, relationship building, inclusion, and communication. One of us is going to introduce the topic, and then the three of us are going to chat about it. And then at the very end, we'll have space for that Q&A. So as you're going throughout today, pop those questions in, and then we'll address those questions at the end of the event. We will have a final question for you to answer in that chat. So before you log off, please make sure you stick around for that closing question too. And again, we'll be emailing you after this with a link to the video. We'll also email you a resource for you that kind of covers some of the tips and tricks that we share today. So make sure you keep an eye out for that one. But now, after all that chit chat and introduction to you all, I do want to introduce our first topic for today, the community engagement process. This is really about bringing people together and kind of the broad perspective of what this process could look like. So we'll be talking about creating spaces, finding partnerships, and really how to keep it fun. So Annette, would you like to start us off today on that?
Oh, sure would. Thanks so much, Allison, for doing that great introduction. I'm glad to be here with all of you today and to be here with my colleagues, Rachel and Allison, to talk about this whole process of becoming and growing your creative district. That's the ultimate goal of all of our presentations. So we want to start by talking about creating space. Right. So setting the space for fruitful community conversations is going to be an important part of getting good feedback and buy-in for your creative district. You know, if the community and if the folks in your community don't feel like they can be part of this process or that they weren't invited to be part of the process, it's going to be really, really hard to gauge their support and really to get your creative district up off the ground and make it sustainable for the long term. So this starts with you and your planning team having a clear understanding about what you need and want from your community, and also being willing to hear what it is that they need and want as well, which may be slightly different from the things that you think that your creative district should provide for the community. Understanding and being honest about your team's capacity to manage community conversations and keeping things on track towards your goals is really key. Oftentimes the creative districts are being started by folks who don't have a lot of experience in technical community development, right? And if you know that your team is really inexperienced in this regard, or you know that there are folks in your community that may be challenging to deal with or have strong personalities, you might consider bringing in outside help to do this for you. Now, our processes at our states don't require that. Some states do require facilitation and some of them don't. We do believe that if you're going to hire a facilitator, it should be a very thoughtful process, done in the same way that you would hire a contractor or a web developer. Don't just pick somebody off the street who says they can do that for you, right? That's not always the best way to go about this. And at the very least, if you're not going to hire a facilitator, it might be important for you to do some learning yourselves about group facilitation techniques beforehand. Our states have planning guides for how to do this work, and we provide some resources for folks to do that as well. We want to make sure that you use them. They're not just there just for, maybes. For us, it's a requirement in Washington that creative district communities use our planning guide as a way to go through the process. And once you start sort of thinking about how are we going to do this, who's going to be involved in helping to facilitate these things, you need to think about who we're trying to reach and where we're going to reach them. Thinking about if your meetings are truly inclusive for the folks that you're trying to reach is important. You have to make space for them early on in the process. We've seen oftentimes that community groups will get really involved and all the way through the process and through the planning and development before they connect with their community, which is really a big mistake because they're part of the community as well. And ultimately, the creative district is for the people and the artists that are in your region. It's important to be thoughtful about this engagement process. For example, thinking about when your meetings are held. If you're trying to reach folks who are in their 30s and their 40s and have a meeting at 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon, that might not be the best time for them. Most folks that age are working, and unless they have a really flexible job, they're probably not going to be able to participate, right? And so when can those folks participate? That's a question to ask, right? And set meeting times for times like that as well, or find other ways to engage. We're going to talk about some techniques for how to do that. Another thing to think about while you're starting to set the space is, do people feel welcome in the planning meetings? Do you have time in your agenda for new folks to introduce themselves and make comments? Do you have sign-up sheets for people to get involved? Are you willing and open to having new ideas and new people be part of your planning process? Even thinking about how the setup of your room can influence how people engage in the process. If your room's set up with just a small little round table with only 6 chairs, there's not going to be room for other people as well, right? And we want you to think that creating space isn't necessarily just about finding a meeting room, but it's also about providing space for new people and for new partners to help you move your process forward. And I'm going to turn that over to Allison now to talk about how do we go about building partnerships.
Right. Thanks, Annette. The tips that I really would love to share with on the topic of community engagement process is how to find your people, and specifically about the finding those partnerships that are going to work for you and what your initiatives are. So to start with that, I love to start with kind of the guiding question. Who is good at getting the information out in your community, and how can they help you get that word out? So thinking about, for example, in your community, it might be a community group, like the Rotary Club is a very connected group, and they're very involved, and they are a great way of communicating. Or maybe it's a quilt guild. Those ladies love to chat and to share. The quilt guilds I've been a part of have always been an amazing spot to be able to share that information and to connect. But other spaces too. So for example, your library or chamber of commerce, business development groups, downtown business associations. And in some communities, a religious institution might also be a really great partnership to help spread the word about the work that you're doing in the community with your creative district. And then don't discount a partner of an individual person. And I think sometimes when we're thinking about partnerships and we're thinking about the people and who gets the information out, we think about organizations. But don't discount those individuals that exist in your community. They are sometimes called the squeaky wheels. So they may not always be the most favorite person of everyone out there, but individual folks can get that info out, especially if they're that person that kind of knows everyone and everything. That might be a really great way to get the information out there. So I think Tina just popped it in there, the chat about micro influencers. Exactly. These are the people that just are communicating, and they can influence your community. And they'd be a really great partner to bring in. So some examples in Idaho, I really love in Glenn's Ferry, which is south of Boise. On Main Street, they have a wine shop that's a little gathering place. And that's an amazing spot to get together for their community. So that wine shop being a partner in the creative district process, if they were going through that, would be a really great partner to bring in, because that's already a gathering place for their community members. What an amazing partner to have to be able to get communication to them. In McCall, which is a little bit north of Boise, they do have Idaho's first creative district, the West Central Mountains Creative District, and the library is very involved in the planning process of the creative district, because they are such a central hub for their community members getting information. So they're an amazing partner to have, because they have these free resources and spaces, and the community is already engaging with them to have these conversations. Another example is much further north in the panhandle of Idaho is in Coeur d'Alene, the Coeur d'Alene Downtown Association. They host large community events, often very arts and cultural based, where they are also gathering businesses together. So not only are they working with businesses, but they're working with community individuals. What an amazing partner to have to get the word out about your creative district and to be at the table with you. So the other guiding question I would encourage you to think about when it comes to partnerships is who is not at your table, who didn't RSVP and who didn't show up. And is there a partner that you could work with to help you with connecting with these groups? This is where it comes into play of oftentimes we'll hear things like, oh, well, we invited them, but they didn't come, or they know that this is happening, but they choose not to be there. Sometimes there's groups of people that are participating and living in your community, and it's not because they don't know or they don't have a space to do it, but maybe they don't feel that their voice is valuable at the table. And that's where having that partnership with somebody who's maybe working with that community group already, and has an established relationship with them, bringing them in as a partner could really help that connection and translate that you really value their input in that conversation. Because sometimes building that relationship and then asking them to be a part of something can be challenging. So if somebody already has a partnership exists between that, they can really bridge that gap. So just as a reminder, think about who's good at getting information out in your community already. Let's get them as your partners. And then who can get the information to groups that aren't showing up? Those partners are also important to be bringing into the fold so that you can make sure that you include those folks as well, that broader community engagement. So Rachel, that's all I plan to share today on this topic. I'll pass it over to you if you want to talk about how to keep it fun.
Yeah, I get the fun part, you guys. Can you tell I wanted this one? So think of ways to keep your community engagement meetings fun. Don't view them as blocks of time to just simply talk at people. And there's different ways to do that. Asset mapping can be a fun exercise and a way for people to walk away with pride in their community. Think about things that are unique to your community. You can do a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And because you're bringing in people with different viewpoints, you're going to get a wide range of feedback. One question to think about is, where's the best place to have a hamburger in your community? Those are great additions to your asset map, and they can also be excellent places to hold meetings. And speaking of food, think about holding your meetings at the local brewery or a coffee shop. There is legitimate research that shows that social eating connects communities. If you're thinking about holding your meetings at different times of the day, like Annette brought up, think about a breakfast meeting before work, maybe lunch, or evening meetings at a local restaurant. One district that I work with had people call ahead to place their order for the lunch meeting, so everything was ready and waiting for them when they arrived. Not only are people more comfortable visiting over food, but it's also a great way to then support your local economy. There's also activities that you can incorporate into meetings. One district used a product like Never Wet to spray paint stencils onto the sidewalk by the local library where the meeting was held. The paint was invisible until it rained, and then the designs showed back up, which then brought people back to the library to see these. You didn't have to be a professional artist to participate. Age wasn't an issue. You could be a student, an adult. Everyone could join in on that activity. Think about creating fast and fun interactive exercises that encourage interaction, such as dot voting, breakout groups, scavenger hunts, or maybe even holding meetings in conjunction with something like a block party or a farmer's market. Going back to the dot voting, that is a quick and easy way for people to see outcomes and to be engaged. Breakout groups allow opportunities to hear from those that might be more hesitant to speak up in a larger group. If you do decide to utilize breakout groups, make sure there's someone who has the responsibility of reporting back to the larger group. Having someone identified ahead of time can remove that awkward look around the table when you ask for volunteers. We've all been there. Make sure that person, though, is a good listener, and they're good at encapsulating the conversation and being able to report back out. I think scavenger hunts could be a really fun idea and a way for people to get to know their community better. It might be a better fit for a younger and a more mobile audience, so maybe think that through, but it allows for a lot of great discussion as they discover new things about their town. Now we're going to switch over to a conversation about what inclusion means in community development. So some of the questions that we're going to ask are, what does inclusion mean in community development? How do you build trust? And how do you create a sense of belonging? I'm going to go ahead and start us off on this. So here's a definition. An inclusive community is one in which people can be involved regardless of age, ability, income, or ethnic or religious backgrounds. So think about it being more than just open to anyone, but think about how to make people from various backgrounds feel comfortable. If you hold your community meetings at the local performing arts center, is that somewhere everyone feels comfortable attending? If you're meeting at a gallery, will people know where to park, what door to enter? If it's somewhere where they're used to paying their bills, like City Hall, is that really a space that they're going to feel comfortable opening up about their dreams for the community? And this also goes beyond the question of accessibility. Just because something might be physically accessible doesn't necessarily mean that people will feel welcome. So kind of think through that. As you engage your community, look at your sign-in sheets, which Annette brought up earlier, and look around the room at meetings. Are there groups that are missing? Are you planning a creative district, but you've only had one artist attend a meeting? Why is that? Be willing to ask those questions. Instead of just issuing a blanket, everyone is welcome invitation, that may not be enough. Reach out to those leaders and those organizations that work with groups that might be missing from the conversation. Also, don't assume that one person speaks for an entire group. This can lead to a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation if they are tasked with taking information back to a larger community. Sometimes I totally understand the hardest thing to do can be to stop, look around, and potentially restart. If concerns come up about inclusion or how welcoming the planning process is, it is okay to take a moment to reset. And not only is it okay, it's healthy to do that. If you're going through a process through your state where you're trying to become a certified creative district, they may ask you for demographic information. I know we do as part of our process. This is an excellent time for you to utilize that information as well. If you look at your demographics and you realize that 40% of your community is under the age of 40 years old, and you have no one under 40 helping to plan that creative district, there's a disconnect that's happening there, and you need to find out what that is. There could be a number of factors, but you won't know those until you start to ask questions and find out why that is. And I'm going to hand it over to Annette next.
Great, thanks, Rachel. So I want to talk about building trust, right? Because, relationships aren't built in a day, and trust is built over time. And trust is one of the keys to making sure that you can have a successful community development process and to create a creative district that's reflective of the community, right? So we need to be able to make a place for folks at the table and to demonstrate, you as the planning person or the planning committee need to demonstrate that you're committed to the end result. Community engagement takes a long time. There will be ebbs and flows through the process. Sometimes things move very quickly. Sometimes you take 2 steps back, 3 steps forward. It's going to take some time, and you have to be willing to allow that time to take place. Forcing something to meet a timeline that you have preconceived may not be the best for your community. One of the things that you're going to be called upon to do while you're doing this work is to manage the process of change, right? So you're asking people in your community to think about their community in a different way. Some of the people that you're going to interact with will be ready for this to happen right now, and others might be more skeptical about it. And both, and there's a spectrum in between, and all of those different perspectives are okay, right? They all have value. You also might need to be navigating your own feelings about change, especially if you're working in a group that has somewhat differing opinions, right? Or the pace is moving too quickly, or whatever the case might be. The key to a successful trust relationship is to finding the common ground, right? So, in economic development, we know that most people want to live and work in a community that's safe, that has decent jobs, good place to live, things for their kids to do, things for them to do, a place that they can feel proud of, right? The how we get there is the thing that people get stuck working through. But I find that if you start from those similarities, it makes it easier for you to move people in the same direction. I always go back to the kind of 80-20 rule of community development. So if you can be okay with getting 80% of what you want out of a planning process, you're doing really, really good. That's very good. 100% is unrealistic, and that's going to alienate people. So you have to be okay with compromise a little bit, right? And sitting still and listening to what other people have to say, and being willing to be honest with what you think and feel too, right? And know that participants in your group may not agree, and that's okay. That's part of the community development process. That's part of getting to that 80%. If we can take that 80% that we all agree upon, that other 20% doesn't really matter as much, right? And it can be set aside for the things that are more common and more important. Sometimes when you're having these conversations, they can get uncomfortable, and you have to be okay with that. And you can also demonstrate through your own actions that hard conversations can be had as long as they're respectful. So we had one community here in Washington that has become somewhat of a retirement community, and they're working on becoming a creative district. And in a planning session that I attended with them, lots of folks who were the transplants were talking about how idyllic and safe their community was, especially compared to where they came to, sort of near the Seattle metro area. But there was one person who actually grew up in the community who said, actually, that's not really the whole story. There's a lot of stuff here that's going on below the surface that you all don't see because you don't interact with it. There's poverty here. There's lots of low-level, seedy stuff. And if we're going to create this creative district, we have to be willing to make space for those people and give opportunities for them to connect to the work that we're doing here and what we're talking about. And he felt uncomfortable at first saying this because his perspective was very much outside of the norm for that group. But and what he said did challenge everybody's worldview, but
So what do you have on the
ultimately
weekend?
it made them think about their process a little bit more and adapt their plans to their suggestions. And this worked because they were willing to listen and recognize that they didn't have the full picture about what was going on in their community. And they were willing to take that new information in and adapt to what this person had said, right? So, he was able to bring that comment out because he knew that it was a safe space, that he knew that if he felt valued, that he could speak. And that was what they created that space to do, right? And so when you give people that expectation that they can have those conversations and say things that might be a little bit outside the norm, they're going to be more bought into the process and willing to step up and to feel like they can belong. And so Allison's going to talk a little bit more about that. What does that belonging mean for folks?
Yeah, thank you so much, Annette. That's a perfect transition into really what I wanted to share kind of as a last thought on this topic is creating that sense of belonging. And how do you do that? When we were preparing for this presentation, Rachel actually had a really great quote that I thought was very poignant for this. And it's that we all want to live in a community that we feel like a part of the social fabric. And so thinking about the communities that each of you live in, what is it that makes you enjoy that community? Why do you choose to stay living there? And oftentimes there's a piece that's social about it. It's not just cost effective or a good location as far as access to a highway, but there's a social aspect to that. So how do you get people involved in a way that helps them feel like they're connected to the work that you're doing in the creative district? How do you get them to feel like they're part of the social fabric of your creative district? And there's really 4 ways that you can do this. So kind of 4 steps to get them to feel like they belong to the work you're doing. And the first is to get them involved in what's happening. Find ways that the people in your community that live there, that work there, that they can share their voice with you and what's important to them. Kind of what Annette was saying with that example in Washington, giving them that place and a safe space for them to share their voice helps them feel like they're very involved and they're engaged. but also engage them in the work that you're doing in your activities, and think about a variety of ways you can engage folks. Not everybody can volunteer and give time to be there. So think of other things that they can do. How can they get involved online? How can they get involved in person at an event? How can they participate in different things? Can they make a donation, monetary or physically? So think about the different ways that you can include people and get them involved in a variety of different aspects. And then when you do engage folks and you're talking to them and you're working with them, get their information, get their name, get their contact info, but also try to record and remember different things that they share with you. So maybe that's their interests, their affiliations, their businesses. The more that you know about the people that are engaging with your work, that you're connecting with, the better you can really tailor your communication to them, the better you can tailor those involvement activities with them. Because if you know, Susie loves spending time at the river, the next time you want to plan a riverfront event, she's the person to talk to. Maybe she's the volunteer. Maybe she's the one that can talk about where you should be hosting that event. So once you get them involved, get their contact info, try to record and write down the information that's important to them so that you can make those meaningful connections. The third tip is to give them information. This is keeping them informed about what you are doing, what's happening around them in the creative district in their community. So share updates, share ideas, send out the meeting notes from a meeting, really just making sure that they feel in the loop. Nothing is worse or more isolating than feeling like stuff is happening that you have no awareness of in your community. So if you want folks to be involved and feel like they belong in your creative district, keep them in the loop. Let them know what's happening. Because if they can't be there in person, those email blasts or those social media posts might be the only way that they can feel like they are a part of the creative district, and feel like they're involved. And then lastly, my fourth tip is to give them attention. Showcase what they're doing, call out their involvement, call out their work, thank them and thank them publicly for being a part, being involved. The creative district thrives on people and the community and the involvement. So make sure that you're not just talking about the creative district as this abstract concept or as a separate entity, but make sure that you're talking about how important the people are in your community. And I think about, when I'm at an event and somebody is taking photos at the event, you better be sure that I'm following those post-event updates to see if I can find myself in the photos that they were posting. Make sure that you showcase your community members being active within your creative district. So kind of a quick recap on my tips here on creating that sense of a belonging. It's get them involved, get their contact info, give them information in return, and make sure that you give them plenty of attention. And I think that leads us into our next topic. Annette, do you want to talk about relationship building and kind of introduce that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we talk about relationship building, ultimately that's the work that we're doing here, right? Is building ethical affiliations with people so that you can achieve work-related goals or any kind of goal. These people can be inside your organization, outside your organization, stakeholders in various parts of the community. They could be other organizations, the government, whatever the case might be, right? You want to be able to build these relationships with folks. And so when you're doing this, it's all about creating long-term respect relationships and developing a culture of transparency that helps mutual benefit for everybody. So we're going to talk a little bit here about some ways that you'll be able to do that, starting with Rachel, who's got some ideas for that.
So I have to say, though, I wanted to go back to Allison and the social media and the Facebook posts. I try to follow all of our creative districts. I hopefully I have, I'm not sure. But I try to follow them all on social media because it is so exciting to see what's going on, and to see their photos and what they're sharing. And so, yeah, share those photos and share those highlights because we want to see it too. We want to celebrate with you. So I just had to piggyback on that. So it was really, yeah, it's a big deal. So one of the things that I wanted to bring up is why this is might sound a little odd, but hang with me, is why separating people may not be the best strategy. And I know that might seem obvious, but don't think of your community meetings as separate meetings for separate groups. Sometimes I will hear from communities that, oh, we held our meetings for our artists on this day. And I'm always a little bit confused why they had their meeting for their artists separate, because this is really about working together, and bringing people together. Now, understandably, sometimes it is inevitable. Sometimes you might be talking to the high school business class during their class time. And so obviously that's going to be kind of a tight group there. No one else is going to be in there. Or maybe you're going to be meeting at the senior center. I saw someone drop that into the chat, and that's a great idea. Going to the senior center maybe during lunchtime. But the idea of community engagement and creative districts is about bringing people together that may not see things the same way and listening to each other. And the process of bringing people together with different viewpoints is really, really exciting. You may get people together who haven't met before, and suddenly they're able to see issues through someone else's perspective, which is always exciting to see. The goal of community engagement is ultimately trust. And this is one of the common challenges when it comes to community engagement. People want to know that their voices will ultimately be heard, and trust can only be earned, never forced. The best way to do this is to have an engagement process that starts early, and then also think about it continuing long after the project's done. If your goal is to become a certified district, that is fantastic. But how are you going to keep that community engagement and those conversations going long after that? Maybe your project is a public art piece. You're doing a community mural. That is fantastic. How do you keep people engaged once it's done and you're moving on? One way to think about it is, don't impose your agenda or solutions on the group, but view it as a collaboration. Which is also an important time to listen. Because you're bringing people together that view things differently, it's really, really important to listen and to respect each other's viewpoints. There was one community meeting that I attended, and an artist wanted to teach classes after school, but they didn't have any space to do that. Another person in the room had an empty building that he owned that wasn't being used. When put together, they were meeting each other's needs. However, neither one of them knew about each other until they started talking at the meeting. If we had divided them into groups with artists and business owners, they never would have met and they never would have had that discussion. And next, I'm going to hand it over to Annette about staying engaged.
I think we're going to go to Allison about feedback sessions. Sorry about that.
Or Allison, whichever.
Either way, we can be flexible. Yes, I want to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, Rachel, about, engagement and bringing these groups together and kind of mixing them up and having a group of different folks from different walks of life and different experiences together in a room. And feedback sessions are a common way that we are doing that. We're gathering information from them and engaging in a variety of ways. But I would encourage you to think about feedback sessions as a multi-pronged approach. There's not just one size fits all. And you may have encountered this, right? You put out a survey or you do a listening session where you host people to come in and sit down. And that's a great way to do it, but not everybody is going to participate. That's not the forum for them. They're not going to come to that. So choosing one feedback methodology is not really going to be inclusive of your community. It's not going to bring that broad community involvement together. So think about how you can offer a variety of ways to gather the information back from your community. So sitting down and doing individual interviews with, those big kind of influencers in your area or those partners that you want, doing surveys, hosting listening sessions, having a suggestion box at different venues, all very good methods. But you can also think about doing really creative things too. So for example, you could do a focus group, you could host a workshop, you could do a feedback kiosk. So to give you an example of what that could look like in reality, Archer City in Texas does a really cool writers workshop yearly. It's a very small rural town in Texas. And there's actually a community member here in Idaho that wants to imitate that kind of process here. And what it is it brings in these writers from all over, local and national, to learn and to grow as writers. But then community members actually volunteer to be a part of this workshop. And the community member from all walks of life, all ages, students, kids, adults, retirees, white collar, blue collar, you name it, they can volunteer and they get partnered with a writer. And those two then sit down and talk with one another. They share about their life. The writer kind of is talking about it. And then part of the workshop, they sit and they share about their experience together talking. And then the writer actually develops a piece based on the conversation with that community member. And I think it's such a fantastic way to gather that feedback from those community members in such a unique way. It provides an educational opportunity for these writers. It's a huge event for their community. But then they have this documentation of year after year, what their community members are saying, what's important to them, who they are, their viewpoints on their town, all of that. And then a final resource I want to share on feedback sessions to give you some creative ideas on how you can bring this into your community and kind of mix up some of the stuff, is a resource I often talk about. It's called Spark. It's the extension toolkit for creative placemaking. It's developed by the University of Kentucky Extension Services. You can find it on their website. We'll also share a link to that with you in the email that you'll receive. But it's a toolkit that gives you step-by-step instructions on how to do things like putting up voting boxes in the area that you're looking to make structural improvements on. Maybe your creative district's on your main street and you want people to give input on public art along the main street. You could put up voting boxes there and they talk you through how to do that step by step. There's movable chalkboards where you can write your question up on the chalkboard and you can put that chalkboard out front of a church and the farmer's market, outside of the library, and have people record their responses onto the chalkboard as they're walking past. So Spark, the extension toolkit for creative placemaking by the University of Kentucky, is a really great resource if you're looking for unique ways to gather feedback from your community in ways that you might not have thought about before. And again, it is a step-by-step. They even give scripts in there of what to say. So it is a really fantastic resource if you're looking for unique ways outside of surveys and listening sessions to get information from your folks. So with that, I will pass it over to you, Annette, now, if you want to take it away.
So, we've been talking about relationship building trust, all of that sort of thing. Rachel and Allison were talking about things to do in the early stages, right? So we're just starting our creative district and we're just building these relationships with people. But relationships aren't, it's not like you just meet somebody for one time and then you call them your friend and you never speak to them again. That doesn't work, right? And so when you're creating when you're trying to build this long-term thing, you have to have long-term engagement, right, with folks. And it should be flexible. should allow for various people to plug in various kinds of ways. So now we've talked about some of the ways that you could do it, obviously through social media and other kinds of things. But one of the things that we've seen with our creative districts in Washington, who've been around for some years now, is like, okay, how do we overcome sort of this, entropy that happens sometimes when we're in this working process. And we were looking at, so the city of Chewelah is a creative district. And some years ago, they were looking for new ways to give, to connect with artists and give people opportunities to participate in their creative district. So they'd been around for a few years, and then they started to realize they wanted to evolve. And so they created a series of forums to get input from artists about what the artists want to see from the creative district. Like, how can the creative district serve them? And one of the things that came out of that was an idea in a way for the artists to be able to connect with each other more frequently. So they implemented sort of this monthly drop-in meeting where folks could just come in and get to know each other. Artists could talk shop. People from the community could come in and open it up if they wanted to participate. And what this did is this helped to bring a more relationship-oriented aspect to their district and helped it to feel more concrete and specific for people, right? Because sometimes it can be a very ethereal idea. What is a creative district? And so something to think about is, they were really successful with this, but even if you weren't, let's say you had these open meetings and only one person showed up, that doesn't necessarily mean that you failed, right? It just means that, relationship building takes time. And especially if you're trying to engage folks that have been left out of community work in the past, especially nowadays, everybody is bombarded with all kinds of information and, trying to capture their attention and learning how to approach them is going to be key to ensuring that we can keep this stuff moving forward. And so we are going to talk about that here in just a second, about language and why it's important.
Thank you. Yes, the last topic of the day that we plan to talk about is about communication. It is about the language that you're choosing, but even more importantly, I think it's both the written language, but also the graphic and the image language that you're choosing. And some of the things that we plan to cover about this are devices that you're using for communication, getting input from various perspectives, and then also the online versus in-person, especially when it comes to surveys. So with that, I am going to turn it back over to Annette to take it away for best devices.
All right. So so we want to talk about what is the best way to communicate with your community. And there really is no gold standard. Every community is a little bit different. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Allison did, like, who are those people that sort of know all the things? How does your community get the word out the best? How do folks normally hear about local activities? Do you have a lot of engagement and people sort of gossiping at the library or the coffee house or on Facebook? Is there an organization or a person who's like the keeper of the calendar of all things for your community? Do you have a local radio station or a local newspaper? Farmers markets or other community events, gathering places. We talked about the Lions Club when we talked about churches. All of those places are devices, if you think about it. They're ways of communicating and places that you can communicate with people. One of the things that a lot of districts don't really do very well in the beginning, or maybe even ever, is coming up with a communications plan or an approach about how they're going to do this. And so that's something that we really recommend that you start to think about. How are you going to get in touch with these folks? What kinds of communication tools are you going to use? And also, are there ones that already exist that you can just piggyback on and get some good results? So we've seen here in Washington a couple of communities that have used their city bills, like water bills, for example, to include a pamphlet of information about their creative district with like a QR code and the URL published on it so folks can learn more about it. And take some survey. Rachel's going to talk a little bit more about all of that, so I'm not going to go into it. But that was just a really clever way. Like, people have to pay their bill to get the water, so you have a captive audience, and that was a pretty low tech way for them to get in touch with people, but it was very successful, and they were able to get a lot of engagement from the process. Another thing to think about is as you use devices, what is that you're talking about? What kind of approach do you need to use? Making sure that your core planning team or your core creative district folks understand the message that needs to go out. We hear oftentimes that creative districts, especially early on, have a hard time articulating what a creative district is, what that means, and recognize that what a creative district is going to be different for different people. So you want to make sure that you have a few different answers about what the benefit of a creative district is based on who you're talking to. So think about who those markets are, who those people that you want to be your partners, who you want to get involved in this process, and what are their needs and their wants, and how can your organization, your creative district work to support that. So for example, a business owner might want more foot traffic to their store. How's your creative district going to help make that happen, right? Those are the types of things that you need to think about when you're planning to use the devices that you're going to be using for communication. Now, I'm going to turn it over to I think Allison first, and then Rachel to talk about what those various perspectives and ways of doing that are.
Okay, thank you so much. In the interest of time, I'll trim some of my comments here, but when it's kind of looking at your communication and touching again on what Annette was sharing, think about sharing and communicating from multiple lenses. Think about who's in your community and who you should be communicating with. For example, in Idaho, we have a lot of communities that have a high percentage of Hispanic or Latino community members. And so they may not speak English, or English might not be their preferred language. And so tailoring the conversation and the communication to them in a language that's accessible to them not only shows that those folks belong in that conversation, that you also value their input and you want to provide something that's more comfortable for them, that's tailored for them. So thinking about things like that, what languages are spoken in your community and your creative district from the folks that live and work there, and how can you provide communication to them in a language or in a way that's going to be responded to by them. And you don't, for example, with other languages, you don't have to be bilingual. You don't have to speak that language in order to develop communication. Here in Idaho, we have a state agency, the Idaho Commission on Hispanic Affairs. They are a fantastic partner to work with, especially when you are looking at communicating with the Hispanic or Latino populations in Idaho. So maybe looking at, does the state have a resource that you could partner with to help you with reaching those communities? Or are there other groups that are already working with folks that are gathering together that you could have them help design that communication? So for example, if you need something in large print, or you need something that's more audio, things like that, who could you work with to help find that? And then the last thing that I wanted to share about this too is kind of going back to that sense of belonging. People want to see themselves literally and figuratively in your work. So graphics, posters, leaflets, posts, they want to see themselves in that. And whether they actually see themselves because you took a photo of them and they're up there, fantastic. But they also want to see community members that reflect their identity. So if you have a high percentage of a population in one particular demographic, are they represented in your images and graphic choices? So if you have a lot of younger demographic, do your images represent younger folks being involved in your creative district, and vice versa? Is your population more aging, and are they represented in your graphics and in your marketing materials? So it goes beyond, right, that concept of it's just language, it's just your choice of words, but it's also, how do you put those words onto the paper? What language do you choose? How do you present that in the words, but also in your images? So with that, Rachel, I'll share it to you for your closing thoughts on the topic.
Thanks, Allison. So we talk a lot about in-person meetings and feedback. I want to talk a little bit about online surveys. They do have a place in the world of community engagement. I do think they are a supplement to in-person conversations. Nothing can replace getting people around a table and talking. But online surveys can help you track information in a more quantitative nature. So it can help you gather data that can be helpful in reporting. There are some tools such as SurveyMonkey, Google Forms can help you with surveys, Mentimeter, and even Facebook has a survey feature. Each are a little different and have their own benefits. Facebook can give you very quick answers to a short selection of questions. SurveyMonkey is a tool you can use to ask a lot of questions. If you decide to go that route and want to ask a lot of things, I would prepare people for how long it's going to take to complete that survey. You don't want them to get halfway through and go, no, I'm done. I'm over this now. But no, some may opt out if it gets to be too long. So just be prepared for that. The information that you receive from online surveys can be quickly collated and plugged into graphs, which can give you a look at responses, which can also be helpful. Mentimeter has a word cloud feature, which is fun to do with a group and you can share back later and with interested parties. And so those are fun to use also. But think about what it is that you want to learn from your survey. What is it that you really want to get out of it? And that will help you prioritize the questions that you want to ask. In an online survey, I would focus on close-ended questions, which are questions that have pre-populated answer choices like check boxes, multiple choice questions, that type of thing. You can ask open-ended questions, but I would save them for the end so that they're quickly going through the other questions. You start to build that relationship of trust with them throughout the survey, and then they feel more open to sharing their thoughts at the end. Surveys can also be used in connection with incentives, but be aware, it can create bias because of the incentive. One organization that I worked with, they offered a survey and they offered candy as an incentive if they turned in their survey. And they had an overwhelming response from 5 to 10-year-olds, let me tell you. And it threw off the information that they were really trying to gather and who actually attended that event where they were doing the survey. So it was something to think about. And then think about words that are absolutes. So things like every, always, or all. So for example, do you always eat breakfast? And their options are yes or no. Well, those are absolutes. And if they eat breakfast half the time, you're going to get a lot of no's. So it may throw off the data that you're actually wanting to get. So think about those wording choices. Try not to ask 2 questions in one. As we are opening our spring grants today, we are very aware of if you ask multiple questions in one, it doesn't always work. You might get the answer to one question or the other, or you might not get an answer because they don't know how to answer it because it becomes confusing. And we've talked a lot about being able to get their email addresses so that you can stay in contact with them and share information with them throughout the planning process. If you want to share volunteer activities, that type of thing with them later on. The other thing I would suggest is having someone else look it over before you send your survey out. If there's a question that is confusing to them, it probably will be to someone else. And don't be afraid to move questions around so that they flow differently. Sometimes just in the order that you ask questions, you'll get different responses. So try moving things around and seeing how it flows. Be okay with switching it up a little bit. With that, we want to leave a few minutes for questions. I know we've kind of thrown a lot at you.
Right. Rachel,
So,
we're coming
go ahead,
right up
Annette.
against we're coming right up against time. So it's 2:29 right now, and we want to make sure that we can be respectful of that. We did get some really great questions in the chat. Some people have very specific questions around surveys. So what we're actually going to do, one of the things that Allison mentioned is that we have sort of a handout and an FAQ that we're going to be providing to you, and we can provide additional information with those specific questions around length of survey, time of survey. Someone asked a question about how much is too much, like information, when do we start to lose people? And we can certainly add that into the tips and tricks that we're going to be talking about. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for joining us. Again, as a reminder, on March 28th at the same time, so 1:30 Pacific time, that would be 3:30 Central Time, is that correct? That we're having our next webinar, which will be about organizational development. So we're going to be talking about building your organization, building a good structure for your organization and your creative district organization, and how do you keep it sustainable over the long term. Michael put in the chat the registration. We'll also be sending out more information for registration as well. So be on the lookout for that from us. And then also for the attendees today, we will be sending out that FAQ document here within the next couple of days. So again, thank you all for your time. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful afternoon. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.